Welcome to Creating Calm Parenting with Mind, Body, and Spirit. I'm Corinne and Cayce, your co-host. I'm an integral leadership coach, a mother of 2 amazing children, and a lifelong student of the Edgar Cayce readings. And I'm here with my friend and co-host, Dr. A.R.E. Dijamco. Hi, Arlene.
Hi, Corinne. Hi, everyone. It's Dr. A.R.E. Dijamco. I'm an integrative physician, a pediatrician, and a cranial osteopath. And we are so happy to be here with you today to talk about a fairly deep topic, but we want to talk about in interesting ways. And this is on Edgar Cayce on depression, because whether you are just having more blue days or having more situational like depression or just feeling like a lack of interest in ordinary things, then there are ways that we can address it, reflect on it. And we're going to talk about Cayce therapies in order to look at this in so many different ways. So we will be able to figure out different perspectives. So see what areas you might be able to incorporate in your lives. And of course, if you need extra help, you feel like you're maybe having more intense depressive symptoms, then of course, please get help. So before we dive into our topic, Corinne is going to start us off with our opening meditation.
Yes, thanks so much, Arlene. So let's just take a moment to center ourselves. You can close your eyes if that's appropriate, or just let your attention come inward. Find your feet on the ground. Find a space in the sole of each foot where you can imagine yourself connecting down to the earth, down through the floor. See the dirt. Feel yourself connected and held. Let your awareness travel up now through your ankles and your shins, your knees, your thighs. Let your attention stay for a moment in your hips and your low belly, inviting a bit of relaxation there. Become aware of your whole torso, the softness of your belly, your back, your ribs and spine, your chest and heart space, your shoulders, your upper arms, your elbows, your forearms, your wrists, the palms of your hands and each one of your 10 fingers. And scan back up to your neck and your throat, the base of your skull and your jaw, the back of your head, the top of your head, and your face. Relax your forehead, your cheeks, and all the tiny muscles around your mouth. And now let's just take 3 deep breaths together. All right, thank you so much. So, as Arlene mentioned, we're going to be talking about depression, sort of bringing together all of the material, sort of a beginner's glance into all of the material in the Edgar Cayce readings on working with depression. And then Arlene and I are going to be integrating how we worked with depression in our own work, with me as a life coach and her as a doctor and cranial osteopath working with her patients. So to start us off, we'll begin in the way that we always do, with an excerpt from the Edgar Cayce readings. This comes from reading 241-1, and it says, impulse in brain forces, or its reaction, are of 2 natures, the white and gray matter, as is ordinarily called. One, an impulse, the other, the active force that carries on same. In the body, when the impulses come from the pressure as has been created in the forces seen to the brain itself, we have that of the activity without the impulse to carry same forward. Hence, we have what is commonly known or called melancholia, or depression, or the inability to carry out the impulses of the body. Yeah. So there's a lot in that excerpt, and we're going to kind of take it step by step and move through it as we talk about depression from a psychological perspective and sort of psychotherapy approaches to it, and then also the medical, biological, scientific side of things, and then some really specific Casey therapies that we can integrate into our lives to help address depressive feelings or depression itself. So to start out, let's talk about the stuckness and the pressure that's mentioned in this excerpt, Arlene, and how we see that relating to depression.
Yes, that pressure means so much on many different levels or dimension because that pressure
Yeah.
can literally be physical pressure or tension in the body pushing on the nervous system, on the flow of all the fluids. It could be emotional and mental pressure that we know thoughts are electricity and our emotions are also a kind of energy. So it can build up this pressure. I think of it like if you had a soda bottle that was shaken up and it had all this pressure built up and it just wanted to be let out. And the health is in the flow. So when we have a buildup of pressure, there is a stuckness. It's like
Mhm.
backed up plumbing, whether back up in the emotions, in your thoughts, in the flow of all the fluids, of the nerve impulses. And so depression is a stuckness to this normal flow. So you get all this pressure, and that impacts the brain, that impacts our nervous system, that impacts our mood, and and there's really neat ways to look at this from psychology and from medicine. So we can use that understanding of the stuckness and pressure, and then reflect on it in different ways. And so, Corinne, you were talking to me about this triangle of experience, which I find to be a really fascinating way to understand how depression might come about, like what the purpose of depression is and why someone might become depressed from this understanding from psychology. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So to um, I'm going to take a therapeutic. This is a model that comes from psychoanalysis and psychology back from the 70s. A gentleman by the name of David Mellon termed this model called the triangle of conflict. And then a woman who does a lot of, um, has a model of therapy that actually my husband uses primarily in his own therapy practice that he shared with me called the triangle of experience that comes from Diana Fosha. And this is just kind of called the change triangle. And it basically is trying to help us be able to mentally wrap our minds around how stuckness can happen on a psychological level. So when something happens in our lives, any sort of circumstance unfolds, we have a core emotional response to it that's hardwired through the center of our brain where we're not making a conscious decision about how we want to react. There's just an emotional response to something that happens. And there are 7 core emotions that are identified in this model, and they are sadness and grief, anger, fear, disgust, joy, excitement, and sexual excitement. And those are kind of core emotions, like I said, that automatically arise. Now, when those emotions automatically arise in us, if 2 things happen to inhibit those emotions from being expressed, there are 2 main ways that they can be blocked. One, that instinctual feeling that we experience is in conflict or is not approved of or not okay with one of our primary attachment people in our lives, the people who we depend on for approval, for love, for survival sometimes, like they are disapproving. The feeling that we're feeling is in conflict with what we know will be acceptable to them. That's one of the one of the reasons that these core emotions can be inhibited. And the other one is that the emotion itself is too big. It's too intense. It's too overwhelming that we can't process it, either because of where we are in our developmental process or just because it's hugely traumatic and a big deal. If one of these two main things happens, we'll shut it down. We'll inhibit one of these core emotions. And when we start to inhibit these core emotions, we have an inhibiting emotional response to that is either shame, guilt, or anxiety. And when we feel those three emotions, that gives us a clue that there's another core emotion underneath that we're covering up, that we're feeling this inhibiting emotion around shame, anxiety, or guilt, and that there's probably one of these two main reasons that we're not really letting ourselves feel something that's happening underneath. When we start to feel anxiety, shame, or guilt, those are uncomfortable emotions. I think we're all familiar with all of them. And when we start to feel one of those three inhibiting emotions, we'll often take a defensive action or a behavior or do something to try and avoid feeling those uncomfortable feelings. And those actions that we take can look a million different ways depending on the person that you are. One of them has often been identified as depression. Depression is an action that we can take, whether conscious or unconscious, depending on our chemical buildup and the situations of our lives, but to sort of orient depression in that. I also feel like through my work as a coach, and I don't know if Arlene would agree with this or not, that depression can be an inhibiting emotion itself. It can kind of join shame and guilt and anxiety as something that can be an indicator that we're covering up a core emotion that's happening underneath. But any sort of compulsive or addictive behaviors that we do, any sort of avoidance behaviors that we take, any sort of over or under, any sort of excess that's going on in our life that feels out of balance to us, that can often, we can connect that to some sort of defensive behavior that we're taking in our life to maybe avoid something that's going on. So if you notice that, there's a whole process for sort of slowing down and unpacking where you might be on this change triangle and caring for yourself. And the first step of that is just kind of slowing down and noticing, okay, as Hugh Lynn Cayce used to say a lot when working with ideals or teaching, working with strong emotions, he would say, we can ask ourselves, what have we here? What's going on with me right now? What am I noticing about myself with objective, neutral, curious, kind ways of looking? What's going on? And then feeling some self-compassion for ourselves and sort of allowing ourselves to really honestly and transparently track, what emotions are we feeling? What is going on in our life? And getting to that core emotion. That core emotion, as Arlene was talking about, there's a stuckness that's inherent in all of this, and that this core emotion that wants to be expressed, seen, validated, acknowledged, and allowed to be accepted in the world. We want to find that core emotion, tend to it, ideally be in skillful relationship with someone around acknowledging the okayness of what we were feeling at the time when we were feeling it and allowing it to move and heal, which relieves that pressure or stuckness and allows us to be in more of that state where we're able to be in relationship and able to be feel the energy and kind of joy and desire to be connected to our life, which can relieve depression in some way. Now, obviously, that's a fairly complex process of doing that takes time and care. But we just wanted to offer that as sort of a model that's alive today, that's very current, being worked with everywhere, that's pointing to this stuckness that I think the Edgar Cayce readings are pointing to really often when they're talking about nerve lapses or the missing of the impulses or this sort of thing that we're talking about that's living on a biological level as well.
That's such a beautiful understanding of depression because it's helping you in a way because there's a core emotion that's been overwhelming, and so
Mm-hmm.
even though that core emotion is stuck, there's it's just to understand that to borrow a phrase from internal family systems, there are no bad parts. So
Right.
there's this aspect of you that's it's actually trying to help you because you're feeling overwhelmed, and so it diverts it in another way to protect you, to protect what
Yeah.
is too much to feel. And
Yeah.
so that's the buildup of pressure, and after a while it starts to feel not sustainable to contain that much pressure. And so I
Right.
talk to my patients a lot about letting your scream out. So whatever that is, if it could be a literal scream. And when I walk them through different mind body exercises, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to let it out. Actually, like you don't actually have to scream. I'm in my office, and so there's other offices around me. And so what I'll have them do is just to imagine themselves screaming or relieving some pressure of whatever's built up. So whether it's a scream, a whimper, a cry, feeling like they want to curl up in a ball and just, it could even be like a frozen state, that curled up state, and then do that while they're breathing. So the imagination of it is the same to the brain. So just giving you ideas of how to look at things in different ways. And it's also nice to be able to do this with another person, to have them help you hold that sacred space, that healing space for you. And this is what we do with my patients and Corinne with her clients. But I also seek this out for myself. So I just went to Sedona this last weekend for the purpose of being able to work with other people, to have them also help hold space for me. I do this for myself regularly, but sometimes it feels so good to work with someone else, to work through some very intense emotions, whether they're from like childhood wounds or generational wounds, or that's a whole other topic that we could talk about, of where these intense emotions originated. And then
Mhm.
but then to continue our conversation with Cayce talking about depression, and he said it was a lapse of nerve impulse. So
Mhm.
depression was really a depression of the nerve impulses. So the impulses, they're being originated by the pressure, so whatever that is, but they're not going anywhere. They're not flowing. So that's what we're talking about. Okay, ways to start to look at how can we access this flow. And and there are so much more to this understanding. So Cayce was also talking about the nervous system depending on the glands of the body to
Mhm.
provide the chemicals that were necessary for nerve functioning, the neurotransmitters. And
Mhm.
if we look at something that was commonly mentioned in the readings, how the central nervous system, meaning the brain and spinal cord, are to the physical as the soul is to the autonomic nervous system, then we can
Mhm.
start to see that understanding. So the autonomic nervous system is it's activated by the endocrine system. So if your endocrine system is not coordinated, is not integrated, then you can have uh, incoordination of the nerve impulses, or the nerve impulses not flowing as they could potentially in a feel good and balanced way. And there were several glands that were mentioned in cases in the Cayce readings, although just know that the whole body needs to work together. But these are several areas that I'll mention here. So the adrenal glands, the thyroid, and the pineal were noted in several cases in the Cayce readings. So the adrenal glands, they produce many hormones, from your stress hormones to balancing salt to your sex hormones. Now, if you have been under stress for a very long time, or just such an intensity of stress, then the adrenal glands can start to feel tired. They can start to burn out, and we call this adrenal fatigue. So if they tire, then you're not going to get the same coordination or the same flow in the nervous system. The same thing with the thyroid gland. So we can think about the thyroid gland in terms of physical functioning, so needing certain nutrients or maybe having too much toxicity and not able to function well. But we can also think about the thyroid gland in terms of our voice, because it's in that throat energy center. And this is how you can hear yourself. So, do you feel like you're being heard in the world? Can you hear yourself? Can you hear that core emotion? Or your purpose, or whatever your experience is, can you hear yourself? So these are just
Mhm.
areas to consider. And then the pineal gland, which is in the center of your brain, this is responsible for dreaming. It's responsible for making melatonin. Um,
Mm.
so I find that the pineal gland, when it tends to be overactivated, like so when it has a pressure in it, that's what it feels like.
Mhm.
It has a pressure in it, um, that there can be stuck thought loops. So thinking something
Mm.
over and over and over again, and it's not able to flow on to the next thought. Like you think about an argument or a worry, and you can't stop thinking about that worry or
Mm.
that fear. Then the pineal gland can start to get a pressure to it and a stuckness. Or if you're binge watching TV or shows, then I'll also feel that pressure. It's like that visualization manifestation system has just been overactivated and not allowed to flow more freely. So
Mhm.
anytime these areas get stuck, then they can impact how our we feel in terms of our mood. And we talk about improving our own body's internal pharmacy or medicine chest. So there are many pharmaceuticals that are used to alter the brain's chemistry, but we produce these chemicals within our body as well. So can we think about ways that we could support our body so that we could balance our neurotransmitters, so that we can make the hormones that we need to make? So, one great example is serotonin, because over 95% of serotonin is made in your gut. And serotonin is this natural mood stabilizer, which is why many pharmaceuticals are for mood focus on serotonin, like SSRIs, which stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So it makes it so serotonin is more available to your body. But if we support our gut flora with probiotic foods, then we can support our body's own production of serotonin. Or if we also go on morning walks, so that morning sunlight is so great for our serotonin levels. So we can start to look
Mm.
at, like, how can we support our body's own ability to produce these things. I'm not saying that medications aren't necessary, but there are cases where, working with your psychiatrist, psychologist, counselor, um, physician, whoever you're working with, if we can have this conversation as well and not go straight to pharmaceuticals, but to have a more expanded perspective and a more expanded therapeutic toolbox. And so, with that, there are these 8 therapeutic areas to consider
Mhm.
that that come from the Cayce readings. And we had another passage that was from the Cayce readings. Corinne, would you mind reading that?
Yes, sure. And this sort of speaks to everything that you've been so beautifully kind of describing about there being both a physical aspect to what it is that's happening related to the glands and the nervous system and that interaction, and then that has it bridges right over into the spiritual. And as we start to talk about these therapeutic techniques that are offered in the readings, we'll immediately see the profound interconnection or inability to separate what's happening at a physical level with what's happening at a spiritual and mental, mind, emotional level, and how we really want to bring all of that together. It cannot separate any of that when we're dealing with something like this and trying to heal. So this comes from reading 32 07-1. It was given for a 37-year-old man at the request of his mother, who was having suicidal tendencies and sort of years-long depressive state where he was able to function in the world, but sort of behind closed doors with his mother, just really feeling worthless and kind of hopeless. And she was pretty distraught about it. So this reading excerpt says, to be sure, there are pathological disturbances, but these arise more from the psychological or psychopathic conditions than from the purely physical condition. To be sure, there are incoordinations between the cerebrospinal and the sympathetic systems. These are nerve lapses, and we will find we may supply the breaking up of the nerve forces in this body. This will prevent the deterioration or the regular conditions that ordinarily arise when such melancholy becomes a part of the experience. Yeah. So, what stands out to you, Arlene, here based on the conversation that we're having right now?
Yeah, that breaking up of the nerve forces.
Yeah.
When I heard that, like I feel that pressure in the body and pressure in the nervous system, and it
Hmm.
can also feel like static. So we're
Hmm.
not having clear signals, and it's not that. And with signals, more is not necessarily better. So when it's
Hmm.
just flooded, it's like there's a lot of traffic in the
Yeah.
nerve impulse, the flow of the nervous system. So if I think about like
Hmm.
the nerves carrying the signals. When there's a traffic jam, it's like we're not flowing well, and there's
Yeah.
actually like too much going on. So
Hmm.
that's what I hear when you said supply the breaking of the nerve forces of the body,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and this can be done in like many ways. We'll start mentioning some of these therapeutic areas more from the body, but they have an impact on the mind, and the
Hmm.
spirit and that integration because I also heard there that in coordination of the CNS and the
Hmm.
autonomics. So now we're
Yeah.
getting like cross signaling. So instead of
Yeah.
the central nervous system being more related to the body, the physical, and then the autonomics to the soul, now we're getting like this too much mismatch of signals. And so
Right.
the thoughts are starting to take over the autonomics. And then the autonomics are no longer able to have access to that natural intuition or from the spirit
Right.
and that divine
Right.
guidance from the spirit. So,
Right.
to help clear up some signals, um,
Hmm.
one of the first things, in no particular order, but number one would be internal cleansing. So,
Hmm.
if you have signs of toxicity, that could be like constipation, just a backup in the digestion. It could come up
Hmm.
in your skin. So when the digestion is backed up and your liver is backed up, then you might get rashes or blemishes. Um,
Hmm.
or you're just not detoxing through other organs well, whether liver, colon, kidneys. So then it's coming out in odor, so as a foul breath or a body odor. So if any of those handful of things, then you could consider natural ways to detox, whether it's hydrotherapy, manual therapy, the need for more magnesium to be able to like have more regular bowel movements and have more regular flow to the nervous system, salt bath, sauna. So these are all ways that we incorporate in terms of helping ourselves detox and avoiding that melancholia, or in another case you reading, he called it that don't care um,
Hmm.
state of the body
Hmm.
where it's really
Hmm.
depressed and has poisons accumulated in the system.
Hmm.
But to not necessarily just focus just on that toxicity, because I've seen people just get too stressed about the toxicity and not
Hmm.
expand into these other areas. So, um,
Yeah.
number two would be like manual therapy. So, addressing those discomforts of the body, and that can improve the elimination, that can improve the circulation and the assimilation of nutrients. And when we had talked to Dr. Gladys McGarry, who's 103 years old, she's still a practicing physician. She gets weekly massages. So
Hmm.
is practicing what she preaches. And if she is, I mean, she is so sharp and she's just such a bright light. So to see what she's incorporated into her life and how manual therapy has been such an important part of that, whether massages, osteopathic treatment, chiropractic, or other forms of manual therapy, then that could be
Mhm.
a really a nice thing to bring in. Um, Number 3, something we've talked about is this blood and nerve building diet. So you're getting proper nourishment because in order for all your nerves to work, for your endocrine system to work, for your gut to function properly, then we need proper nourishment. So we've talked about this with the alkaline diet, focusing on vegetables, on fruits, getting these sources of probiotics, magnesium, and omega 3s. And I'll mention this one broth recipe by Dr. Norman Shealy. And what he recommended in one article in Venture Inward was to place in a slow cooker 8 ounces of chopped chicken, turkey, or lean beef. And I would say preferably with the bones, in 1 to 1.5 quarts of water, to add a tablespoon of soy sauce, 1 onion, 1 carrot, 1 stick of celery, a tablespoon of vinegar that can help break things up, and cook on low heat for 8 to 12 hours. And then you can strain that or or eat the everything in it if you want. And he said the most important is to drink the that batch of broth every day. So for 6 to 8 weeks, you're going to be drinking some of that broth, and that can be so helpful for improving the blood and nervous system. And we've gone into other podcasts and talked in a lot more detail about these kinds of diets, but
Mhm.
wanted to share that one Dr. Shigley broth recipe with you there. And then going on here, so number 4 would be the Radiac or the Radial Appliance. And this is something we spent a whole episode on, but to mention briefly, this helps with the coordination of the nervous system and the way that it's put on. It helps with the crossing of the signals in the brain.
Mm.
So it helps improve that flow. It works with your own body's energy and helps redistribute it. So you aren't getting pressure buildup in certain areas. It's taking those areas of stuckness and redistributing it in a more feel good, balanced way. And uh, yeah, Corinne, is there anything that you wanted to comment on here
Related to the radial appliance, I think
or any of
my
them?
right. So what I'm noticing is that as we're working with handling depression or feelings of downness during this, if we're feeling this right now, these are the physical ways that we can begin to help support a shift taking place, and the power of noticing that as we're making these choices around diet, or around whether to get a massage, around how to how to take care of ourselves right now in this way, we can connect it to this impacts my mind, like really sort of bringing this framework that Arlene has been laying out, that I've been talking about here, in terms of the interaction between our bodies and our minds, and how that can bring about healing and transformation. And there's this sort of core idea in all of the Edgar Cayce health readings, that the more that we can anticipate and kind of expect healing, the more that we can visualize how we're healing and why we're healing, and how we're supporting ourselves, not in a forced way, but in more of kind of an optimistic, hopeful, sort of wisdom based way of, I know what's happening within my body, within my heart and mind, and why this is happening, and the things that I'm doing to support it happening. These are some pretty tangible things that we can do in our lives working with the Radiac. And we're going to continue talking about some more also outdoor exercise, right? Like spending some time outside moving our bodies, which we've talked about in lots of previous episodes too. And Arlene was talking about it too, in terms of the morning walks, of getting the serotonin and sort of focusing on exercise and being outside. And we've done episodes where we talk about different cross lateral exercises, and doing those outside can also help as well, of just the nerve balancing and bringing in that to our day, and knowing that it can help with feeling down as well. Now, these other therapies that are talked about start to move more into the spiritual, mental, emotional side of things. It's talking about the importance of ideals, which we've spent multiple episodes on as well, of how to work with ideals. And that, most simply put, I think, in the language that makes sense to us today, that's kind of like knowing your why and connecting to a sense of purpose that is awakening, enlivening, and life giving to yourself. If you're working with a loved one who is feeling down, there's such an important piece that's just allowing, just being with what is
Mhm.
without pushing back and resisting it. And so, drawing on what Dr. McGarry was talking with us some about during our conversation with her, is this like finding this little thread or this little stream of movement, of what's ready to move and give, and often connecting that to the why in terms of what brings juice, what brings excitement and meaning, and allowing that to kind of sink down into yourself, to touch into that with intention through affirmation or through prayer or meditation. And then the next idea from the readings of really working with this is what it means to be of service to others, and how we can um, find joy and meaning in that. I know for me, during this season, this time is often a sad, or a time for me, joyful and sad together, for lots of reasons. For sadness and grief, it's around the time that my father passed away. So when the earth smells this way, when it looks this way, when I feel this temperature in the air, I'm just brought back to a really visceral experience of losing him. And that is often challenging for me. And so, and I feel this like stream of down, kind of depressed energy that's just alive in my life. And I woke up this morning feeling, and I think it was coming from my dreams, just kind of really feeling how much joy it brings me to care for my children, to just like take care of them in big ways and small ways, and what a gift it is to be able to be deeply present with them in their lives, and being willing to prioritize that above and with everything else in my life. And that helps me, genuinely brings me joy, and allowing and letting myself feel that, and be with that, and give into it, like let myself do it, as opposed to, oh, there's these other things I should be prioritizing at this time, deadlines and such and such and so and so. I'm just, no, like this brings me joy, and I'm going to allow myself to do it. So finding that way that service is joyful, and letting ourselves feel it, can be helpful as well. And the final thing that we just wanted to touch briefly on is this idea of inspirational readings, or sinking into what brings us inspiration and meaning, and reading books or excerpts from meaningful texts in our lives. And I think it can also be listening to music, or what would you add to that sort of inspirational readings one, Arlene?
Oh, Gladys McGarry's book, Well Lived Life, the Edgar Cayce readings, Course in Miracles, anything that, um, is uplifting for you. So,
Mhm.
if you have, like, a certain spiritual background, then there might be certain texts that mean a lot to you too. So, any of these wisdom teachings can be so uplifting, and combining that with any of the other things, your
Totally.
ideals, your,
Yeah.
the Radiac will power the Radiac up in terms of how it works when you're reading inspirational materials while using it, because it uses your own
Yeah.
energy and helps to distribute that. Um, and it helps you like realize what's important in life. Couple weekends ago, we were so busy and we had so many. I had to get the house cleaned, and I was getting ready for a trip, and we had people visiting, and then in the morning, the dog started barking like crazy, and I
Mm.
went to go see what was going on. And there was this stray dog who was starving and looking at us like literally came to our doors, went to both doors to ask for help. And, so it was really neat to be able to be of service in a different way than
Yeah.
usual. Um, yeah, I mean, I feel like just in my practice that's of service, but this kind of, brought out something else because
Yeah.
it was doing something a little bit different. It was stopping in the busyness to take care
Mhm.
and see that there was something more important than maybe cleaning the house at that moment, and so,
Mhm.
it was and the kids, the way they responded, realizing that, yes, there was something more important, and how they pitched in with the house without me asking them to, because
Mhm.
they saw that we had spent so much time, trying to figure out what to do with this dog and bring to the
Mhm.
vet, and, it was a happy ending, so
Good.
it took about 4 days, but we found the owner, he had a chip. It was quite
Oh,
dramatic,
God.
though, because we were
Yeah.
we didn't wanna bring him in because we thought they might put him down right away because of his, the way he was, but I was like, "This is someone's dog." I can tell, like, you could just tell this dog was used to being,
Yeah.
in a home, and we just couldn't bring ourselves to do that right then, but,
Mm.
I just feel like, okay, that's what taking a moment and serving others in unexpected ways can do
Mhm.
to lift your mood. So,
Mhm.
in the chaos, here was it you could say was, like, more chaos, but because it was of service, it brought out something in everyone, in the
Mhm.
whole family, and then even in people that we talked to, how everybody was kind of uplifted by this small story of the stray
Mhm.
dog.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely. Thank you so much
that's
for
my
sharing it with us.
that's my ending story.
Thank you so much for that. It is when something catches us off guard in a good way, right? That's, like,
Mhm.
kind of shocking, but invites us into our best selves, and I think it's so interesting to look at what we often view as a physical, mental, emotional condition like depression through the lens of spirit is life, mind is the builder, physical is the result, and the spirit as the life, what that means in terms of, like, the enlivening the enlivening quality of finding joy and meaning and purpose and service, what that does at a cellular level to invigorate and bring about flow and movement, at a in our
Yes.
biology, right, is just always so amazing to me to talk about in this way of like, oh, that's what that means when we connect to uh, that give it that generosity and kindness and sense of like, there's something bigger happening here that I am a part of and that I want to be a part of. And the impact of that idea, that sense of energy, basically, and what that
Mhm.
does at a physical level for
On your
allowing shifts to
Yes.
happen is
On
amazing.
your
Yeah,
internal pharmacy, on the flow of your
totally.
nervous system, on the endocrine signal. So, um,
Yeah,
when we talk about these spiritual things, they aren't just left in that etheric world. It is meant to
totally.
be made manifest in the physical. And
Yeah,
so by walking these through spirit like this, like we are literally manifesting it into the physical. And that's how we can change our internal chemistry and our physiology. So it's
absolutely.
fascinating.
It really is. Yes. Thank you so much, Arlene, for this conversation today. So
Thank
good to be
thank
with you
you.
as always.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Corinne, and thank you everyone for being here with us. And absolutely, this is an overview. So if you feel like you need help for someone to hold space with you, for someone to help you walk through your physiology, and then absolutely get help as you need to. And
Mhm.
um, like I said, I did that for myself in this last weekend, and it feels so good to create that space even with help from other people as well. But these are ideas that you can use for yourself. And thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Corinne.